The first thing to understand is that arousal will vary. As you're coaching your kids during a game, some of the kids on the bench may not have their head in the game, may have to kind of pay attention, tune in a little bit better, and you want to find your own ways to communicate and convey that. But the kids out there playing, the ones that are starting or the ones that are in competition, especially as games become tight, usually arousal and anxiety kind of go upward. And so the key is you have to remind kids of some specific skills that they can use during games that only take a few seconds to execute but will provide maximum results. And so I want to go through a few of these things. These are the arousal reduction strategies, things that kids can do when they start to feel overly nervous, overly anxious, so they can get back into that positive zone. Probably the first and easiest thing is to teach the kids that you coach the importance of breathing. Now, of course, that sounds so simple. I mean, we all breathe all the time, but I'm talking about a specific type of breathing. Teaching kids how to bring oxygen all the way into their stomach, to their diaphragm, unlike how we normally breathe, and that is up through our chest. The difference being our chest, our rib cage actually constricts our lungs, and so we're able to bring more oxygen into our stomachs. And so teaching your kids that in those moments where they're feeling really panicky, probably some of them you actually see have the shakes, they want to learn the importance of taking 2 or 3 really deep cleansing breaths all the way into their stomach, holding it for a second or two, and then releasing. Now, of course, depending on your sport, they may not have time for 2 or 3. Maybe it's just 1 breath, but you'd be amazed at how quickly that will bring an arousal level down. Breathing is so vitally important to helping you with focus and with confidence and with staying in the moment and not expecting too much of yourself where it becomes an anxious experience. So breathing can be especially useful in sports where you have breaks in between the action, maybe during timeouts. But this is something you can just tell your kids. If you've already taught them the importance of breathing during games, you can just say, hey, take a deep breath. And you'll be amazed at how quickly that helps center a youngster again. Another technique that kids can use very easily that will help them with focus and composure is what we call the tense relax technique. And that is during games, if they start to feel a little bit overly anxious or nervous, they can take one muscle group at a time. And a lot of times during games, you can't go through your whole body and tense and relax each muscle for a few seconds. So I recommend picking one. Usually the hands are a good place to start because most sports involve the hands. And so what you can do is ask your kids to just tighten their fists for a couple seconds, release, maybe do it a second time, and release again. And what that does is it actually shakes out the anxiety. And it also has a secondary benefit in that it puts the focus back on the athlete as opposed to the crowd or the other team or other factors that really don't have any bearing on the outcome. So I want you to teach them about the tense relax technique. Now this is a really nice technique even in the pregame where they're in the locker room during stretching. They can actually categorically go through each muscle group. It doesn't really matter where you start. You can start with your hands or your feet, but you just take one muscle group at a time. You tense it for a few seconds, release, shake, and you just go through the body. But again, during a game, you might only have time to do something like the hands. Another idea is to go back to the cue word we talked about earlier. Hopefully by this time, all the kids on your team have a cue word or a phrase or an acronym that they're comfortable with. During the game, if you see a kid becoming overly anxious, nerves are off the charts, remind that kid to look back at the cue word and think about that cue word. Again, your mind can't think of 2 things at the same exact time, so if the athlete is thinking about the cue word, he or she cannot be possibly thinking about other things that don't matter. Say, for example, how many people are cheering or, in this case, booing. So cue words are really important. And finally, the last idea during the game to help with this arousal regulation is imagery. During a timeout, maybe for a few seconds, remind the kids to think of a good place. Think of that game a couple weeks ago when we came back. Really prompt them to put their mind in a good, positive, emotionally charged place, a place where they feel good and can go back and draw upon an experience where they were successful. So those are a couple ideas that are really quick, and you don't have to spend a lot of time here, but the key is to do these things. So when it comes to arousal regulation, think about it. Arousal is a human energy that can be directed either for or against you. When kids are flat, they need to pick it up a little bit, and when they're overly nervous, they need to find ways to bring it down to get into that optimal arousal state. So think about the ideas of breathing, the tense relax technique, cue words, and imagery. Those are 4 surefire ways to help your kids get their heads back in the game.